$250,000. Sign here, take the check, and disappear quietly. Knox Crawford placed the settlement folder on the mahogany table, without ceremony, without apology, and without once looking at the woman sitting across from him. His mother, Muriel, sat at his elbow, wearing the thin smile of someone who had rehearsed this moment in her own bathroom mirror, and found it satisfactory. His lawyer, Alec Darroch, clicked his pen, and in the corridor just outside the frosted glass doors of the 38th floor boardroom at Strathmore and Bell on Bay Street, Knox's girlfriend waited in a coat that had cost $1,100, purchased with money. Knox had been quietly moving out of their joint account for the better part of a year, while his wife slept across the hall, trusting without question that the man beside her meant what he said. Every person in that room expected Orla Kincaid to cry, to hesitate, to reach for the box of tissues the paralegal had thoughtfully placed near the end of the table. She picked up the pen, looked at her husband across the width of the table, and signed her name in one clean, unhurried line. If you are new here, please subscribe to Ivory Secrets and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop a comment below. Tell me what city you're watching from today. This channel has reached people in places I never anticipated. And I want to see exactly how far this one travels. Now let us go back to the morning it all began. Orla woke at 5:05 without an alarm, the way she had for the past 14 months, not because sleep came easily in the Rosedale house, because it had stopped coming easily at all. On the night she sat in the bathroom, at midnight, reading a message, on Knox's unlocked phone that began with "Miss you already," and ended with a heart. She had sat on the cold tile floor for 40 minutes, then she had washed her face. She had gone back to bed. She had said nothing. She had made a decision instead. This particular morning, she did not rush. She made coffee using the small Italian press she had bought, years before she ever met Knox, at a market in the distillery district when she was 28, and still learning what kind of life she wanted. She stood in the kitchen in a plain navy robe that Muriel had once described at a dinner party as something you'd find in a hospital gift shop, honestly. And she drank her coffee with both hands around the mug, and she looked out at the back garden. Frost dusted and still in the October dark, and she let herself be exactly where she was, for exactly as long as she needed. Her phone rang at 6:15, Fraser McLeod. "Everything is in place," he said. "Good." She took a slow sip. "The board? They've been ready for 2 years. They were ready the day your grandfather died, and you asked for time." He paused. "We could still make the announcement before you step foot in that building. You wouldn't have to sit across from him at all." She looked at the garden. A cardinal had landed on the back fence, bright as a warning. "No," she said. "I want to be in the room when he understands." "Understood," Fraser said, with the particular quietness of a man who has known you long enough not to argue with your instincts. She ended the call. She rinsed her mug. She dressed carefully, a dark charcoal coat, plain, the kind that belonged to a woman who had nothing left to prove with her clothing, and she walked out of the house on Cluny Drive for the last time, without looking back at it once. The offices of Strathmore and Bell occupied the 38th floor of a Bay Street tower, built to remind you, from the moment the elevator opened, that someone here had decided who mattered and who did not. Orla had walked into rooms like this her entire life and understood their language completely. She was unbothered. The receptionist looked up with wide eyes as Orla approached the desk. She had clearly been briefed on the nature of the appointment and had clearly expected someone who looked more like a person in crisis. "I'm here for the 9 o'clock, Orla said pleasantly. "Of course, Miss Kincaid, right this way." Knox was already in the boardroom when she arrived. He was talking to Alec Darroch about a project in Calgary, gesturing loosely with one hand, that particular architectural confidence of his, the ease of a man who had been told he was exceptional since he was 22 years old and had never encountered sufficient reason to question it. Muriel sat 2 chairs down reading something on her phone, holding it the way she held most things, as though it was already beneath her. When Orla walked in, the room shifted. Knox looked at her with the expression she had come to recognize over the last 18 months. The mild impatience of someone whose calendar includes an appointment they would prefer to have already concluded. Muriel looked up briefly, then back at her screen. "You're late," Muriel said. "I'm precisely on time," Orla said. She pulled out the chair directly across from Knox, not the small one at the far end of the table, the one slightly apart from the others as though belonging to a lesser meeting, and she sat down. Alec Darroch cleared his throat. "Mrs. Crawford." "Miss Kincaid," Orla said without any heat. He blinked, continued. "We appreciate you coming in. I think you'll find the settlement terms are quite reasonable. Given the circumstances," he slid the folder across the table. She did not open it immediately. She looked at Knox first. He looked well. He always looked well. The specific wellness that professional success and careful vanity maintained, the grooming of a man who had never spent a morning genuinely uncertain about his own worth. He was watching her with an expression she had first noticed about 16 months into their marriage, the expression that said she had become, somewhere along the way, a matter he had already decided. She had loved this man. That was the true and inconvenient fact of it, and she held it without apology. She had loved him when he would call her from job sites to describe the quality of light coming through a new window frame, because he wanted to share it with someone who would care. She had loved him through the hard first year of the firm, when a project fell through, and he came home silent, and she had not pushed and had simply made dinner and sat beside him until the fear passed. She had loved him through Muriel's steady accumulation of small cruelties, the comments about Orla's work, her ambitions, her background, the way Muriel would ask Knox at family dinners whether Orla might enjoy taking a class or something to stay occupied. She had loved him, and he had weighed all of it and decided it was worth $250,000. She opened the folder. She read every line, every clause, every carefully worded condition. Knox shifted in his chair. Muriel set her phone face down. 3 minutes passed without anyone speaking. "Orla," Knox said, using the measured voice reserved for conversations he considered already finished. "I understand this is difficult, but we both know this marriage hasn't been working. This is the right thing, for both of us." She looked up. "Knox," she said, "when we had dinner at that small place on Queen West on our second date, do you remember what you told me you wanted in a partner?" He frowned, caught mid-performance. "I don't see how." "You said you wanted someone genuinely interested in the world, someone who thought about things, cared about things, beyond the room they happened to be standing in." She held his gaze. "Do you remember saying that?" He said nothing. "I believed you," she said. Her voice was as steady as water that has been still for a very long time. "I shaped my daily life around the belief that you meant it, that I was the person you were describing." A pause. "I also found the messages on your phone 14 months ago. I found the transfers from our joint account. The lease on the King West apartment, signed under your holding company's name. You have been planning this for almost a year." Alec Darroch placed his pen on the table. Muriel's breath changed audibly. "I'm going to sign these papers," Orla said. "I want you to understand that. I was always going to sign them. Not because you have won something, not because I have no other choice." She pushed the folder back across the table by an inch. "I'm signing because I am choosing to leave, not because you are choosing to discard me." She signed one clean line, unhurried, entirely sure of itself. The room felt different afterward, pressurized, somehow, changed. Knox stared at her name on the paper. Then he looked at her face, trying to find something there he couldn't locate. Orla stood. She straightened the collar of her coat. "That's it," he said, not triumph, something closer to confusion. "That's it," she said. She picked up her bag. "Orla," his voice stopped her at the door, not commanding, quieter than that. "Where are you going?" She looked back at him over her shoulder. "To work," she said. He almost laughed, managed not to. "You don't have a job." The smallest smile crossed her face. "No, I have a company." And then Knox's phone buzzed, and Alex and Muriel, who never permitted sound in professional settings, heard her own screen light up across the table. Alec picked his up first. His face changed in the specific way of someone revising a calculation that was already complete. Knox looked at him. What? Alec turned the screen around slowly. A financial wire notification from the Globe and Mail. Kincaid BioSciences names Orla Kincaid as active CEO following 4-year transition period. Markets respond immediately. The stock symbol was up 18% in the first 4 minutes of trading. Knox's own phone began vibrating with increasing urgency. 6 missed calls. 2 from the partner managing his firm's largest institutional account. 1 from the chairman of the Calgary Cultural Center, a project backed in part by a private foundation. Knox's financial advisor had described to him last spring as one of the quietest but most significant investment vehicles in the country. The Kincaid Family Trust. He looked at the door. Orla was already gone. He found out the rest in pieces, the way you find out something too large to hold all at once. Kincaid BioSciences had been founded 41 years earlier by Orla's grandfather, Angus. Privately, quietly, in a building on University Avenue that most people in Toronto walked past every single day without knowing what was inside. 8,000 employees. Research facilities in Toronto, Vancouver, and Halifax. A portfolio of drug delivery patents embedded in the supply chains of 63 hospital networks from St. John's to Victoria. A private family trust that had been estimated, when Angus died and his estate was disclosed, at somewhere north of $2.8 billion, every share, every patent, every board position passed entirely to his sole surviving heir. Orla Moira Kincaid. The woman Knox Crawford had described to his colleagues at a firm dinner 8 months prior as brilliant in her own way, just not particularly driven. Muriel Crawford sat in the boardroom on Bay Street and understood, without requiring any additional information, exactly what she had spent 5 years doing. She had looked at a woman who carried more than she had ever imagined, and she had called her a decoration. She had known in the peripheral way of someone who does not want to look directly at a thing that the name Kincaid appeared in old Toronto financial circles with a kind of weight that did not attach to ordinary families. She had filed it away without ever asking Knox to pay attention, because the possibility that her son's wife was someone significant did not fit the story she had been telling herself about her son's life. She said nothing now. That was perhaps the most honest thing Muriel Crawford had done in years. In Fraser McLeod's car heading east through the city, Orla watched Toronto go by through tinted glass. "How are you?" Fraser asked. "Exactly as I expected to be," she said. He studied her face the way he always had, with the careful attention of someone who had known her since she was 11 years old, sitting across from her grandfather's desk at Kincaid BioSciences, learning what a balance sheet meant because Angus believed his granddaughter should understand the full weight of what would one day be hers. "The board wants to do the full public release by noon," he said. "Not yet." "Orla, there are things I need to understand first. Tell me what we have on Mark LaRue." Fraser opened his folder. "He is the principal of LaRue Development Group. He has been in preliminary discussions with 2 members of the Crawford Architecture Board about a joint venture on the waterfront parcels, the same parcels under consideration for the expanded community health facility." He looked up. "The contract the Kincaid Trust submitted a proposal for 8 months ago." The car moved through a yellow light. How long were those discussions in place before Sabine joined Knox's firm? Approximately 8 months prior. Orla was very still. "Knox doesn't know," she said. "We don't believe so. His involvement appears to have been genuine, or at least genuinely uninformed." She thought about Knox's face in the boardroom, the confusion in it, the thing beneath the confidence that she had begun to recognize too late as not certainty, but performance, a man who had spent so long at the center of his own story that he had mistaken proximity to success for the substance of it. "Don't release that information," she said. Fraser looked at her. Knox made his own choices. The fact that someone was also using him doesn't change what he chose to do. I'm not going to hand him a reason to feel like a victim in a story where he isn't one. Understood, he made a note, but we document everything. Everything, she confirmed. The building on University Avenue was exactly as she remembered it. No signage beyond what was necessary. Clean stone, glass doors, and above them in plain letters, Kincaid BioSciences. She had not stood in front of it in 4 years. She put her hand on the door. She went inside. The 16th-floor boardroom was built to think in rather than to impress. A long table, 8 chairs, windows overlooking the hospital district. The 7 people, seated when Orla entered, rose before she had taken 3 steps. She had known every face since childhood. Her grandfather's people who had sent her handwritten letters every year and maintained the company without pressure. Because they understood what Angus had built and what he had always intended it to become. Please sit down, she said. They sat. She remained standing. I owe each of you an apology, she said. I owe you 4 years. One of the older men at the table shook his head immediately. She held up one hand. I do, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I stepped away from this because I thought I was choosing something better. What I was actually doing was hiding from myself. She looked around the table. My grandfather used to say that the only thing more dangerous than ignorance was the deliberate choice to look away from what you already know. She paused. I looked away. I'm done doing that. She sat. She opened the briefing document, and Orla Kincaid, the woman her husband had described to his colleagues as not particularly driven, began to run the company her grandfather had spent a lifetime building for her. Knox called that evening. She let it ring twice before she answered. Why didn't you tell me? His voice was stripped of its usual architecture, the company, the trust, all of it. Why? She looked out the window of the apartment on St. George Street. The one she had kept in her own name for the entirety of the marriage, where she had stored her grandfather's papers in her own notebooks, and the photograph of Angus on his last birthday, squinting happily at something off-camera. I told you many things, Knox, she said. You weren't listening to most of them. This is different. Is it? He had no answer for that. Send me a message, she said. I'll see if I can find the time. His message arrived that night. I know, I have no right to ask for anything from you, but I need 10 minutes to say what I should have said a long time ago. If the answer is no, I'll respect it completely, and I won't contact you again. I'm asking anyway. She read it twice. She set the phone face down. She finished the report on her desk. She poured a glass of water. She stood at the window for a while. Then she typed, Thursday, 2 o'clock, Kincaid offices. 10 minutes is all I'm offering. She sent it and went back to work. Knox arrived at 2 o'clock precisely. He looked like a man who had not slept well since Tuesday, which was exactly what he was. He sat across from her at her grandfather's desk, and he looked at the framed company seal on the wall. 2 overlapping circles in the year 1983, plain as everything Angus Kincaid had ever made. And he looked at her. I was wrong, he said without preamble. Not strategically, not legally. As a human being, I looked at you every day of our marriage and I saw what I expected to see, rather than what was actually there. I told people you weren't ambitious, because you didn't talk about ambition, the way I did. He stopped. I also took money that wasn't mine to take, and I told myself I had earned it. That's not something I can qualify. Orla kept her hand still on the desk. He looked at the window. I also figured out the LaRue connection. Last night. His voice was flat. Mark LaRue introduced me to Sabine as a coincidence. It wasn't. No. Did you know? 3 weeks ago. You didn't tell me. No. Why? She looked at him for a long moment. Because what LaRue did doesn't change what you chose to do, Knox. I wasn't going to hand you a reason to rewrite yourself as the one who was wronged. He was quiet, then he said, I want to ask you something. He met her eyes. During the marriage, was there ever a moment when you came close to telling me who you actually were? She unfolded her hands. She placed them flat on the desk. 3 times, she said. He waited. The first was about a year in. You came home from a site meeting and you sat in the kitchen with your head in your hands and said you weren't sure the firm was going to make it through the quarter. And I sat across from you, and I thought, I could solve this right now. One call to Fraser, and this fear is gone by morning. She paused. I didn't, because if I removed your fear by revealing what I had, we would never know what we actually were to each other. I needed to know you would find your way through it yourself. He was very still. The second time was at your mother's birthday dinner. About 18 months in, she said something about the career I didn't have while looking directly at me, and you looked at your plate. Orla's voice remained level. I thought about ending it in one sentence, watching Muriel understand in real time exactly who she had been speaking to for a year and a half. She looked at her hands. I didn't, because if I needed a name to make my husband defend me, then the marriage was already something other than what I thought it was. Knox closed his eyes briefly. And the third time was the night I found the messages. Sitting on the bathroom floor, I thought about walking out and showing you everything. Every account, every document, every year of what I had been building while you were doing what you were doing. She paused. But that would have been about hurting you. And despite everything, I didn't want to hurt you. I just wanted it to be over. He opened his eyes. They were not dry. He did not try to hide it. I'm sorry, he said, not carefully managed, not structured for effect, not because the company is in trouble, not because of what the papers are writing. I'm sorry, because you were the most honest person I have ever been with, and I treated your honesty like a limitation. I looked at a woman who chose to love me without announcement, who chose presence over performance, and I decided her quietness meant she had nothing to offer. He shook his head. I was staring at the ocean and wondering where the water was. Orla looked at him. She thought about every version of this conversation she had imagined in the past 2 weeks. The satisfaction she had expected to feel. What she felt instead was more complicated than any of that. Not forgiveness, not release, but the particular quiet of two people finally telling each other the truth in the same room at the same time. I believe you mean that right now, she said. And I think you have spent the last 3 days understanding something real about yourself. He stood with her. But Knox, meaning something after it is too late, is not the same as doing something when it would have counted. I know that. I'm not saying it to punish you. I know, he said. I needed to hear it plainly. I've spent a long time surrounded by people who soften things for me. She picked up her pen. Your firm is going to be fine. The LaRue connection doesn't need to become public if you cooperate fully with the city's procurement review. What happens to you from here is entirely your own work to do. He picked up his jacket. He walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the frame. The waterfront health facility, he said without turning around. The proposal under the Kincaid Trust. Was that yours? Yes. How long? 18 months. He stood there for a moment doing the arithmetic of that, understanding that while he had been planning a divorce, she had been designing a community health center for the neighborhood where they had lived. He walked out. The door closed softly. Orla stood in the center of her grandfather's office. The city moved below. She set the pen down on the desk where she could see it, the same plain pen she had used to sign the papers on Tuesday morning, kept in her coat pocket since, and she let herself feel the full weight of what the last 3 days had been. Not celebrating, not performing composure. Just being a person who has survived something, sitting quietly with the evidence of her own survival. Then she went back to work. The public statement came out on a Friday. 3 priorities for Kincaid BioSciences over the next 5 years. A renewed commitment to the company's Employee Research Partnership Program and the Kincaid Health Initiative. A $22 million endowment for community health infrastructure across 4 Canadian cities, anchored by the proposed facility on Toronto's waterfront. No mention of the divorce. No mention of Knox Crawford. No mention of anything except what was being built and who it was being built for. By the following afternoon, it was the most read story in the Globe's business section. By evening, it had moved past the business section entirely, not because of the numbers, though the numbers were significant, because of a photograph, the only existing image of Orla from the years of her marriage, taken at a charity dinner 2 years prior, where she stood slightly apart from the room holding a glass of water and looking at something off to the left of the camera with an expression that was entirely present, entirely unguarded, and entirely her own. People who had never heard her name before that Friday looked at that photograph and said without knowing anything beyond what they had read, "That woman always knew exactly who she was." That had always been the point. The waterfront health facility broke ground 11 months later, on a cool Tuesday morning in September. Orla stood at the site in a yellow hard hat that was deeply unflattering and which she wore without a trace of self-consciousness. 8,000 square feet of primary care, mental health services, and maternal health resources for a neighborhood that had needed them for 20 years. Fraser McLeod stood beside her. He was 63 and had known her half his life, and he watched her pick up the ceremonial shovel with the particular attention of someone witnessing something they had waited a long time to see. A reporter from the CBC called out from the small press line, "Mrs. Kincaid, what would you say to people who were surprised by your return to public life?" She turned toward the camera. She was unhurried. She was clear. "I would say," she said, "that the people who are surprised were not paying attention." She paused. And I don't say that as a criticism. Most of us spend a great deal of time not paying attention to the people standing right beside us. She looked directly into the lens. "The invitation, from where I'm standing, is to pay attention now." She turned back to the ground in front of her. She pressed the shovel into the earth, and Orla Kincaid, the woman who had been handed a check and told to disappear, built something that would still be standing long after anyone remembered. The morning they tried to send her away.